Somewhere around June 2024, German developer Piranha Bytes ended their 27-year run of releasing niche Eurojank RPGs for a primarily German and Polish market after being unable to secure funding for their next project, following a rather lukewarm response to their final two games, Elex 1 and 2. What's most striking, though, is that after those 27 years, the games they'll be remembered by will likely be the ones they released in the first three, and that have defined their legacy ever since, Gothic 1 and 2. In fact, the Gothic franchise has now bizarrely outlived the very studio that created it, with an upcoming remake of Gothic 1 by Spanish developer Alchemia Interactive. I think it's fair to say that after the disastrous premature release of Gothic 3 at the hands of the now defunct publisher Jowood, Piranha Bytes never fully recovered. Every true Scotsman would agree that despite their best efforts, the company was just unable to recapture that magic that once propelled them to at least regional stardom. Their later attempts at catching lightning in a bottle did not even remotely live up to what fans associated with the legendary studio's name. In the case of Risen, too small in scope. And with Elex, just... Okay, look. I want this video to be about a specific game design philosophy that may die out with the very studio that championed it, but it's hard to balance that against my grievances with the mishandling of those later titles and the company's sheer inability to get with the times in all other aspects of game design. Controls, writing, graphics, what have you. My relationship with the studio is very conflicted. Gothic 2 is the first RPG I ever played, and I still consider it one of the best ones ever made to this day, with Gothic 1 a close second. This is actually a copy I borrowed from a high school friend about 24 years ago and forgot to return. So, Sebastian, if you want it back, just give me a call, I guess? Now, when I heard the news of the closure, I was mortified, like part of my childhood had just evaporated. I was mourning all the potential games they still could have made had they just been given one more chance to turn the ship around and finally reach the global audience I felt they deserved. But I also went, yeah, that checks out. For the blessedly uninitiated, to be a fan of Piranha Bytes meant signing onto the doomed ship of a fan cult adrift somewhere in the Bermuda Triangle between Stockholm Syndrome, gambler's fallacy, and the definition of insanity.
No, please. This time is going to be different.
I'm honestly glad that it underperformed a bit. Maybe this will be somewhat of a wake-up call to improve more substantially for the sequel. Wake up call.
When I look at the evolution of European RPGs, there is a spectrum of prominence, and in those final days, Piranha Bytes wasn't even on it. And no, you don't need to overinvest and inflate your team into the hundreds like CD Projekt to remain globally relevant as a European developer of RPGs. How do I know this? Spiders. At the time, French developer Spiders was about the same size as Piranha Bytes, just about 30 people, and just like the Piranhas, their games up till then had been justifiably trashed by critics. But then, after Mars Warlogs and the hilariously titled Technomancer, we got Greedfall. It may not have been revolutionary, but it delivered because they'd clearly learned and moved on from previous mistakes. The controls no longer sucked, the art design was no longer aimless and generic, and the writing was significantly less cringy and pedestrian. Now, Spiders has its very own problems, which actually gives me the opportunity to dish out a bit of posthumous praise for Piranha Bytes, who after Gothic 3 had been publicly pushing for the industry's complete elimination of crunch. I don't know how faithfully they actually adhered to this dogma in-house, but I for one am inclined to believe them. However, I don't think what did them in was a lack of crunch. I think it was religiously clinging on to old ideas. So let me tell you why I think one of those was actually worth clinging on to.
This area is restricted. No entry.
Hi, my name is Malte. This is Crocodile Gambit, where we usually act like the out-of-touch ivory tower game study scholars we are in meticulously researched and consequently hopelessly pretentious video essays. But I thought while working on the next main piece, that'll take at least another half year to finish, sorry, With these news, I just had so many emotions bubbling up, anywhere between religious veneration and decades of pent-up rage. I just needed to get it all out. If you haven't caught on, this one is going to be way more personal. I won't be quoting as many sources, there's no methodology, this is just straight from the heart. The subject of this video is a bit more intangible than my usual spiel, more ethereal, so to highlight the design philosophy at play, I want to compare Gothic 2 to another small, quirky indie game you may have heard of called Skyrim. Both these games are actually eerily similar in their narrative setup, but then differ dramatically in how they execute on that premise. Hear me out. In both games, we play as a prisoner who was incidentally freed from captivity through the intervention of a major threat to the world, old gods and dragons. And now, it is upon us, as one of the few surviving witnesses of the catastrophe, to send word to the top authority sitting in the nearest town to warn them that dragons are back. Okay, so let's start with how Skyrim lets you play out this riveting premise.
Maybe I'm the Dragonborn. I just don't know it yet.
After miraculously surviving our own execution, choosing between the traitors and the racists, and fighting our way past spiders, bears, and necrophilic torturers, we finally make it to the other side of the tutorial cave and are greeted by a breathtaking view of a vast open world to explore. We could go anywhere. See that mountain over there? No, we're not doing that. But hey, we got no lead, no supplies, no money, so let's just follow our tour guide. After backseat gaming our career choices,
well, to each his own. It's not for me to judge.
He eventually leads us to his sister in Riverwood, where we are outfitted with a continental breakfast and sent off straight to the Jarl of Whiterun to deliver the news. And, in theory, we could do just that. Now, every seasoned Skyrim player knows that we will not in fact do that because the Jarl's court wizard will inevitably send us back here, although the game will make sure to nudge the player into accidentally fulfilling that future quest ahead of time anyway, through another quest from the local trader who'll send you to the exact same spot, the barrow uphill. In fact, the start of the game is designed to assault your senses with glimpses into the endless possibilities that await, and the seemingly organic ways in which the world would react to doing things out of order, when really everything is choreographed to a T. The pack of wolves ambushing us right in front of the town entrance, Feindal's pathetic pickup artistry being shoved in our face, so we're inclined to talk to his rival, the bard at the inn, where we witness the exchange between Delphine and the innkeeper, who drops a hint on the Riverwood trader's break-in, whose sister, Feindal's love interest, escorts us to the bridge outside the North Gate, leading to the serpentine path up the hill, and once the job is done, upon exiting the barrow, making a beeline towards the town, conveniently sends us straight into the arms of this lovely old hermit lady who won't let us leave her basement alive.
I've fallen!
It's all neatly laid out, down to our presence reliably alerting birds in the same tree at the same distance on every single playthrough. That's because this whole section was originally designed as a playable demo for PR purposes. However, it isn't linear at all. None of this is mandatory. You could break with the sequence at any point and just wander off and play the actual game. But it is also a great introduction to how Skyrim really works. Truly, this is the actual game, getting sidetracked by jingling keys in the form of locations, encounters, and whole quest lines, strategically arranged to string you along and derail you from your actual goal, talking to the Jarl, without ever actually grabbing the wheel, thus making you feel like you always just happen to be in the right place at the right time. I've played Skyrim for over 900 hours, and have not once finished the main storyline. Players do all these activities not because they have to in order to progress, but because they're fun. In other words, it's a sandbox. The world's our oyster, no one can tell us what we can and cannot do. So, let's instead choose to forgo all these distractions and make our way straight to, hey, what's that, a giant? No. Straight on, past the carriage driver that offers to take us anywhere we wish, past the stables where we could buy a horse, waddling up to the city gates like we got nothing to hide, guard stops us, and...
Riverwood's in danger too. You better go on in.
lets us through. Okay, blacksmith, local gang wars, aspiring merchant, dead man walking, child beggar, tellus preacher, yada yada. Here we go, the Cloud District. And there's the Great Hall of Dragon's Reach. How could a meager peasant like me, sentenced to death no less, ever be granted permission to tread on such holy ground. They left the door open. And there's the Jarl, and he actually lets me talk to him, and believes me. So, what by the 9 divines just happened? We were given a deceptively simple task, which turned out to be actually just as brain-dead as advertised. So, in order to keep us invested, the game tried its absolute darndest to sidetrack us at every turn. The actual gameplay arises not from push, but pull factors. No one's forcing us to raid the barrow ahead of time, to solve a love triangle in Riverwood, to help the companions bring down a giant, look into the beef between House Biggie and House Tupac,
I could tell you were a sharp one.
how to adopt a child, or how to commit murder. We are being pulled in all directions by enticing gameplay opportunities. But if we wanted to, we, a convict on the run that helped the #1 enemy of the state escape, can walk right up to the royal throne into stabbing distance because we claim to have seen a dragon.
I want to hear what she has to say.
Not only that, the Jarl's top general and top mage both take us in as a mercenary for hire. By the time we return from slaying a dragon just a few minutes later, we've been showered in royal gifts from the Jarl himself: 2 pieces of armor, a weapon, the right to buy a house in the city, the title of Thane, and a personal henchman sworn to trigger every trap across the 7 winds. Hell, we can even roam around the Jarl's private quarters, for crying out loud. It is, frankly, grotesque. What should have ended in an immediate arrest instead let us skip about 10 years of military career.
It's the greatest honor that's within my power to grant.
And I loved every second of it. This is peak, no-holds-barred, shameless, high fantasy adventure shenanigans. We've just started out, and we've already felled a bear, a nest of giant spiders, a pack of wolves, a group of Imperials, a giant, an army of undead, and a dragon. This world, these people need me. But, and this is crucial, I don't need them. As much as the game world does keep turning in the absence of the player, unlike, for example, The Witcher.
No, don't spawn it all at once.
Engaging with Skyrim society is mere window dressing and technically optional. I could just allow myself to be led astray by the game's actual content and emerge from some ruin decked out in high-level gear, gold, and experience after 100 levels of dungeon crawl before even setting a foot into Whiterun. Sure, there'd be no random dragons around to burn non-essential quest givers to a crisp, and I wouldn't be able to bark people off cliffs, but the point still stands, and is all the more prescient knowing that if I did do this tiny quest, I'd even have access to dragons and unlimited shouts, and am now truly no longer dependent on anyone to reach my full potential as an individual. Skyrim wants to give me maximum liberty to go wherever and do whatever I want, which means that it must untie me from the shackles of society as well. I can't be pinned down by what other people think I am, where I should be allowed to go, what I'm allowed to do and allowed to refuse to do, what I'm allowed to buy, or whether I'm even worth listening to in the first place. In Skyrim, I rarely, if ever, must ask for anyone's permission. I can just do.
You sought me out on your own initiative.
There is a society, sure, but my power over it does not really depend on my standing in it. This is why I would call this world design an individualist RPG. It takes a lot of inspiration from the frontier hero, a cowboy, a traveler and mediator between the two worlds of wilderness, like dungeons, caves, ruins, whatever litters the map, and civilization, like towns and cities, bound to neither of them but home to both, unlike most other characters who are either bound to the wilderness, like bandits, or to the cities, like most friendlies. Think townsfolk versus outlaws in a western. And just like the cowboy, we serve as an intermediary between these two worlds, fighting bandits, returning stolen family heirlooms, exterminating the local wildlife, anything that the sedentary townsfolk, confined to the safety of their own homes, cannot reckon with.
Fine, but only to the edge of town.
Our home is the space in between, the frontier. But that also means that, for example, becoming a leader of the Companions, the Mages College, or the Thieves Guild cannot mean committing to a professional life-altering position. I can even helm all three of them at once, disappear into the wilderness and never show my face ever again. They're not full-time roles. Becoming a guild leader is not one of many career paths I'm now locked into, just another item of the endless list of personal achievements to be ticked off and forgotten. If the game did tether social interaction to social responsibility, it would inextricably link me to the realm of the townsfolk, and in turn shatter the trope of the wanderer between the worlds. And so it doesn't. This genre of storytelling, based around the American frontier myth, is therefore quintessentially American, so of course we would find it in a quintessential American RPG. So let's take a look at how a German RPG goes about telling that same story.
Ich weiß gar nicht, warum sich so aufregt.
I think it's safe to assume most of you have no clue what Gothic is about or have never even heard of it, and that's fine, I forgive you. I mean, there's a reason I chose Whiterun for the thumbnail. Although, if you're German and born in the 80s or early 90s, I'm afraid we'll need to have your citizenship revoked, unless you can correctly identify this sound. So let me start at the very beginning. Major spoilers for Gothic 1 and the first act of Gothic 2, and I'm really trying to keep this as short as possible. We don't want to catch the video essay virus here. The Gothic trilogy is set in a high fantasy medieval world where the kingdom of Myrtana is besieged by orcs. To fund the war effort, the mainland has established a prisoner colony in the Valley of Mines, located on a nearby island, next to the city of Corinus. However, upon trying to envelop the entire colony in a magical barrier, the king's mages accidentally trapped themselves within the prison, allowing the inmates to stage a revolt and seize control. They have now split up into 3 different camps, with differing plans on how to orchestrate their great escape. The king is forced to bargain for his ore by trading with the prisoners of the so-called Old Camp, while those of the New Camp try to blow up the barrier with said magical ore. And the High as a Kite Swamp Camp, inhabited by a magic-wielding stoner cult, attempt to awaken an ancient Lovecraftian god they call the Sleeper, who they believe resides in an underground temple and, once awoken, will free its apostles from their shackles. And indeed, after the events of Gothic 1, in its final death rattle, the Sleeper shatters the barrier and, as we learn later, calls upon the dragons for help, who rally an army of orcs to descend upon the Valley of Mines. Actually, let me hit pause here and allow me to take a brief detour on the general tone of the series. The world and writing of Gothic is a little bit more grounded than Dungeons & Dragons, less esoteric and more brutish than Lord of the Rings, but not as dark, sincere and political as, for example, Game of Thrones or The Witcher. It was developed by a team out of the Ruhr Valley, a literal valley of coal mines that drove the German industry for decades, if not centuries. Actually, some of Piranha Bytes' former team have now founded a new studio called Pithead, like the entrance to a mineshaft, in an explicit reference to their Ruhr identity. Around this West German valley, ravaged by industrialism and urbanization, arose a distinct working and lower middle-class regional culture, stereotypically marked by hospitality, heartiness and a crude, vulgar humor that stood in contrast to the virtues espoused by the Roman Catholic and Protestant churches, also dominant in the area. Gothic's writing has often been touted as uniquely Ruhr Valley, carrying a specific charm and crass tone you would never find in a game translated from English to German. Likewise, the German voiceover is legendary, and its use of regional vernacular
Keine Lust, den Leuten ihren Arsch hinterherzutragen, was?
may likely be lost on players that only ever experienced the supposedly awful English dub. I say supposedly because I couldn't tell. I only ever heard bits and pieces enough to want to crumple up and die. If you're an anime fan, you're likely all too familiar with the unmatched cringe of certain English dubs. Even for the footage I needed for this video, I refuse to have my childhood memories tainted by anything that aren't these familiar, lovable German voices.
Ich suche Arbeit.
Einen weiteren Knecht kann ich nicht gebrauchen.
I say all this because I think the unique social flavor of the game's writing matches, and I would argue elevates, the uniquely social character of its gameplay. More on that in a minute. So, Sleeper gone, barrier gone, prisoners gone, our hero, who has slain the beast, is buried under the rubble, rescued by the black mage Xardas, and about a month later awakes with frail body, blurry memory, and conveniently erased skill set in Xardas' recently summoned Black Tower near the city of Corinus. There, the king's paladins have recently laid anchor to try and retake control over the disaster-ridden ore trade. So they locked down the harbor and sent envoys to the war-torn Valley of Mines, but also confiscated all of Corinus' produce, which has angered the local farmers, many of whom, with the help of former inmate mercenaries, have rebelled against the paladins' tyranny. Which leaves the paladins in a bit of a bind, everything is running out: ore, grain, and time. This is where Gothic 2 begins, with Xardas, who senses a disturbance in the Force, sending us, the hero, to notify Corinus' new head honcho, Paladin Lord Hagen, of the dragons who are behind the orcish onslaught in the valley. Simple enough. So, we relieve our savior, Timu Saruman, of his valuables strewn about his demonic man cave, and make our way to the city. As we step outside and the first sunbeams hit our low-poly face, we can see the obvious difference to Skyrim's level design right off the bat. Gothic's map is not laid out in such a way that it lets your eyes scan the horizon in wonder and amazement, but as a narrow, handcrafted maze with winding paths that make the map appear grander than it actually is. But it also allows for more attention to detail, which in turn becomes more important for gameplay, and allows for the game to just block a path with a single NPC. I wonder if that'll come up again.
Foreshadowing as a narrative device.
So, we fight our way past a few goblins, a young wolf, a sheep? That's cute. Well, I have no use for a sheep, so that's another 10 experience points, thank you very much.
Foreshadowing.
There are a few dubious NPC encounters, one of whom tries to lure us into an obvious ambush, unless we try our luck and disclose to him that we're a former inmate of the prisoner colony. Usually, this would get us arrested on the spot. But in this case, we ingratiate ourselves to the bandit, who is also a former inmate. He instead helps us out, and we're off. We don't need to fight our way past these bandits. We couldn't if we tried. The first lesson of Gothic 2 is that true power lies in the ability to turn foe into friend. Or to find a friend with a longbow. Finally, just around the next bend, there it is. The city of Corinus.
It's good to see its walls again.
We marvel at its majestic watchtowers. Here's the drawbridge of the southern gate, and then it's just a right turn and...
Halt!
Was denn?
So then, the second lesson. Where Skyrim was banking on our curiosity to explore the land off the beaten path because we wanted to, Gothic pulls up a wall and forces us to engage with it. Because if we don't, we're literally barred from venturing further. To pass by the gate, we need a good reason for the guards to go easy on us, and there's quite a few options. To name only a few, we can go work on Lobart's farm, help with the harvest and run some errands around the estate, so he'll lower the price for a fresh set of farmer's clothes. Those would let us dress up as a farmhand looking to buy new tools off the blacksmith in town. We could also strike a deal with the merchant down the road to get a signed permit for the foreboding price of a minor favor sometime in the future. We can also pose as the alchemist's new apprentice by showing up with a handful of useless plants, which a former friend from the swamp camp assures us is enough to fool the undiscerning city watch that can't tell a recreational drug from a bushel of grass. Or we could also just bribe the guards, if we can somehow scrape together a sizable enough sum. So the third lesson in there is that Gothic is a game of dress-up. It matters a whole lot whose persona, or whose colors we put on, and how we would lie our way through cross-examination. In Gothic, we can literally fake it till we make it. And then there's the potential friend or foe game again. It turns out it was worth trusting the weed mage Lester with that tip about impersonating the alchemist's apprentice. But can we trust the merchant? And what's this guy's deal?
Hey, du.
You referring to me?
Once inside, we're, let's say, greeted by Paladin Lothar, who reads us the terms and conditions of life within the city walls. We also learn that we're currently in the lower city, the district of craftsmen and low-tier merchants. Then there's the upper city, to the right, home to the bourgeoisie, like shipping tycoons and mine owners, as well as the Paladin's headquarters, and only accessible to full citizens. And to the left, we may get swallowed by the docks, which Lothar, in his infinite paladin wisdom, presents to us as a sort of no-go zone. Shall we trust him? Well, we later find out that it is a place of poverty, crime, and corruption with shady individuals around every corner. So should we ever feel the need to borrow coin from a suspiciously welcoming moneylender, waste our gold in the red light district, get punched in the face at the pub, or gamble on our own life in illegal back alley duels, the docks are our literal port of call. But it is also teeming with opportunity, and many paths to success, that incidentally do not involve becoming a paladin, would actually lead straight through it. However, our current quest is to get to the paladin's headquarters to the right. So we skip through, click accept, turn right towards the upper district, up the steps, and
Halt!
this is just brilliant level design. Like, unironically, with the stairs right there next to the city entrance, we're inclined to discard the rules we were just read and instead try our luck right then and there, only for us to get slapped in the face and told to get a job. Yes, I mean it, we need to become an apprentice in order to be granted citizenship.
Du bist Dreck unter meinem Fingernagel. Mach, dass du wegkommst.
Alright, then what are our options? The 5 master craftsmen in the lower district are the blacksmith, the huntsman, the carpenter, the alchemist, and the tailor. Although, realistically, 2 of them don't even take on apprentices. And no matter who we pick, which, by the way, will determine how we will make at least some of our money, we'll still need the approval of the other 4 craftsmen. So, hours upon hours later of hunting and skinning wolves, collecting dead and deciding not to keep any of it to ourselves, convincing the local preacher that we're an honest, upstanding man that would never tell a lie, and killing an orc. I didn't kill an orc. I just found an orc weapon on the ground and showed it to the blacksmith to make him think I did. You know, fake it till you make it. We're finally admitted as an apprentice and in turn have become a citizen. Alright then, you know how it goes. We walk up the stairs, close in on Lord Hagen's town hall, and surely they wouldn't do this a third.
Halt!
Next lesson, we gotta join a guild. 1 out of 3, which yet again exponentially increases replayability. Joining a faction will have major implications for who our allies will be, and the angle from which we can even approach this veritable diplomatic minefield of a setting. And of course, I can't stress enough that the factions are in charge practically anywhere you go. This isn't Fallout 4 with a 360 no man's land of opportunity, and the factions neatly tucked away in each corner. Piranha Bytes maps tend to look more like a series of tubes, any of which may easily be blocked by a handful of highwaymen of any given guild, forbidding entrance. Or a golem. Sure, there's uncharted wilderness out there, but it's comparatively irrelevant. In Gothic 2, you can spend dozens of hours just solving quests in the city, the surrounding farms that are either in dispute or allegiance with it, and mediate between faction outposts around the map. There's no extensive network of dungeons to get lost in, no ginormous side quests uncoupled from the main conflict to waste hours upon hours, and practically everything is tied in with either of these 3 guilds, vying for control over resources and political leverage. And it's always 3, by the way. Piranha Bytes games always have you choose between one of 3 factions. You just heard me recite the plot of Gothic 1 to you with the new camp, the old camp, and the swamp camp. So who's it now? We got the City Watch, called the Militia, who are in bed with the Paladins. Then there's the Mercenaries, hired on by the wealthiest farmer and landowner of the region, and we got the reclusive Fire Mages, living in a serene monastery away from everybody else. Ideology-wise, let me break them down like this. You essentially get to choose between the cops, the mafia, or the church. Which is to say, they're all just different flavors of oppression, incompetence, and arrogance. And the game does not shy away from making you regret your choice immediately upon joining any of them. The Militia racketeer the farms just as much as the Mercenaries do.
Und wenn du Lobart siehst, kannst du ihm sagen, er soll die Schafe gut füttern. Wir kommen demnächst wieder zu ihm.
And the mages operate like a dragon atop a hoard of gold, while their hard-working novices get crumbs, all to the tune of an outward-facing veneer of altruism.
Wie viel ist denn eine übliche Spende?
Lass mich sehen, was du dabei hast.
Arbeitet.
Ja. Der Herr sagt, gebt, wenn ihr habt.
This game is pretty straightforward.
Where, for example, The Witcher whimsically asks, would you still be a force for good in this world if the world itself was pitted against you? Gothic just drops the pretense and goes, no, we think you wouldn't. It's a system designed to pitch everyone against one another. So if you can't fight them, literally join them. Just to really hammer it home, to welcome a new mage into their ranks, the mages literally pit their novice hopefuls against each other in a map-wide scavenger hunt.
Viele Novizen wollen natürlich die leeren Innos in der Bibliothek studieren, damit sie vorbereitet sind, falls sie erwählt werden.
And trust me, you won't get that robe without getting some novice blood on your hands. The system forces you to either be oppressed or become the oppressor, at least in part. And while I don't agree with that nihilist sentiment in the real world, I do appreciate the raw honesty of this design.
Wie geht's?
Gut, Meister. Ich arbeite hart und versuche, die Magier nicht zu enttäuschen.
What's more, the only path to new gear and skills is through your guild. You won't be able to loot mercenary armor from a fallen soldier or buy a mage robe as an unaccomplished novice. You'll only be given what your membership and rank allows. Wearing the armor of a paladin, after all, should not be an indicator of your wealth or unscrupulousness, but your virtues like faith, bravery, and an unfaltering crusade against weed, unless it's your own. Likewise, if you want to truly master two-handed weapons, you'll have no choice but to join the mercs. If you want to use both magic runes and be a master fencer, you have to enlist with the militia. And if you want to rain fire on your enemies or have an army of skeletons follow you around, you must go through the tiring process of brown-nosing the mages. Where Skyrim just lets you level a skill through personal experience, Gothic claims that you can't truly be a self-taught expert of anything. You'll need to rely on your guild's teachers. Now, the easiest noob-friendly way to guild membership is joining the town militia, as I said, a sort of police force, which requires you to be a citizen and ideally alive, a rigorous vetting process that'll make American cops feel right at home. The militia combine physical combat skills with a bit of magic, and if you're a good little pig, you may even get promoted all the way to paladin. But don't get your hopes up. The militia and paladins have 3 whole quest lines just on persecuting weed and moonshine, as if there wasn't a literal horde of orcs staring us down.
Gute Arbeit. Das Kraut werden wir sicher verwahren.
It's an almost Reagan-esque obsession, really. Consequently, you can't wear militia armor around the docks. No one will trust you with valuable information for fear of ratting out their own community. Join the cops and the game will make sure you know you're no longer welcome among the poorest of the poor. And drug dealers. Mercenaries, on the other hand, wield no magic and instead focus on raw brawn and armor, and may even become dragon hunters, who look like Shredder of Wish, but at least you won't look like a literal mobhead. However, convincing the mob to take in an outsider requires quite a bit more convincing than the militia, like helping with organized crime and beating people up. Now, for the enviable privilege of sweeping the monastery quarters and handing out sausages to your fellow novices, yes, these are real quests, the mages just ask for a sheep? Where the hell would I get that? And a humble donation of 1,000 gold? I mean, sure, let me just grind a few goblins in the nearby cave, which will never respawn. Here we go. They drop about 2 gold. 2... I mean, why not? Let's borrow the money from this trustworthy fella. I'm sure this won't come back to haunt me.
Wie viel willst du?
Or I could join the Thieves Guild so I can pay a guy to teach me the ancient video game logic art of walking with uncomfortably bent knees to make myself completely imperceptible to affluent local homeowners.
Was schleichst du denn darum?
And pick the upper city clean, sell their silverware to the suspiciously unquestioning merchants in the town square, and rightfully earn my place among the virtuous, God-fearing monks. Or shall I murder the moneylender in his sleep? Can you see the exhilarating thought process here? These sound like ridiculous, insurmountable tasks, but you know they aren't. And organically figuring out one of the many ways to solve them, or maybe ask around and find a way to bypass them, is a thrilling experience I haven't seen replicated anywhere else. In fact, most encounters in Piranha Bytes games function more like puzzles. They can't be brute forced unless you're severely overpowered. There's creative solutions here and there, but for the most part, you'll need to lean on others to progress. In other words, like with Skyrim, exploration is king, but it is a sort of social exploration. Progress will not be unearthed from caves or the forest floor, but will reveal itself through detective work, rigorous networking, paying attention to people's preferences, gambling on their presumed allegiances, and just putting 2 and 2 together. As a result, Gothic may appear less like an action game and more like a really fancy point-and-click, spiced up with all the emergent gameplay, wacky physics, and scummy exploits you'd expect from a game like Skyrim, but just as its cream topping. The soggy bottom revolves entirely around ingratiating yourself to authority that doesn't care if you live or die. Now that's what I call authentic. Only once we've been accepted into one of these guilds are we finally backed by enough authority to lend our Cassandra cries some credence and be granted an audience with Lord Hagen. Once the message is delivered, we are greeted by a celebratory jingle and a pop-up of about 16 gorgeous pixels, informing us that we've now entered Act 2 of 6. This quest has ballooned into a sixth of the game, and if we just go by the time spent, it's more like a third. What was supposed to be a short, the beacons are lit moment turned into a heroic odyssey of farm work, picking flowers, buying a sheep, and outrunning my creditors.
Ich habe schon von dir gehört.
So let's compare these two experiences. I think the fundamental difference between the two design philosophies at play here is perfectly encapsulated by our encounters at the respective city gates. If we tell the guards of Whiterun about the dragon attack, they immediately take us at our word and grant us entry. Now, when we tell Paladin Lothar, he calls us a loon and threatens to put us behind bars should we go around spreading our silly dragon stories again. Because to him, we're just some low-life peasant he's never seen before, so he has no reason to believe we're anything but a charlatan. That changes when our social class changes, a concept that has no meaning in Skyrim besides corrupting guards into letting us off the hook for a crime. Once.
Oh, forgive me, Thane. I didn't realize it was you. We'll look the other way this time, but even the Jarl's influence has its limits. Be more careful.
So, here's my hypothesis. In Skyrim, success is defined by the achievements of the individual.
You're Dragonborn.
In Gothic, it is defined by social standing.
Du bist Dreck unter meinem Fingernagel.
Progress, in turn, is measured not by how many experience points you've gathered, but by the social mobility you have unlocked. No matter how many monsters or men you slay, you can't fight your way into the Paladin's headquarters. I mean, you could, but for one, no upstanding citizen will talk to a known criminal, and what's even more bizarre is that in order to gain the raw physical strength and equipment necessary to overpower the guards, you'd have to acquire the exact sort of guild memberships those same guards would ask of you in the first place. Your permission to access the spaces governed by certain communities and characters cannot be forcefully acquired or overridden. It must be granted by superior forces. And it is those forces the player must appease and impress, not just in order to progress the story, but chiefly to grow their character. By comparison, Skyrim just lets us prance right into the revered Cloud District, and no one bats an eye, not even this smug asshole.
Do you get to the Cloud District very often? Oh, what am I saying? Of course you don't.
But that's the thing, Nazim. I do. So, what's going on here? Well, Skyrim, for all its bravado of boundless freedom, still feels the need to perform social structures and hierarchies for the sake of atmosphere, but it won't actually enforce them on the player. On a mechanical level, concepts like rank or class must remain purely cosmetic. Just like Khorinis, the city of Whiterun is built on ascending levels that represent the classes of their respective residents. Sort of. But while Gothic 2 turns this lore into mechanically tangible rules, into a grand labyrinthian puzzle that we must slowly ascend through, for Skyrim, it is little more than seasoning, with no actual consequences for where we can go or what we can do, because we're essentially classless. The same applies to abilities and equipment. In Skyrim, we usually acquire new skills, weapons, and armor by just picking a random direction and clearing all of the dungeons, forts, and caves in our way, like an insatiable swarm of locusts. In Gothic, we must instead rely on our guild to provide us with new armor and in-house workshops on fencing or fireballs, all of it tied to our rank, which in turn is tied to our accomplishments within the guild. We always act in the shadow of indestructible institutions towering over us.
Ich sagte, ich könnte dir helfen, nicht ich werde. Solange du keiner von uns bist, kannst du dir einen anderen suchen, der dich unterrichtet.
In Skyrim, we're mostly in charge of our own destiny. Or, to put it differently, in Skyrim, unlimited freedom is a universal privilege from the get-go. In Gothic, it's the ultimate goal we strive to achieve. Obviously, this silly binary I just made up is a continuum and no game sits on either end of the extremes. Even in Skyrim, I must commit to certain mutually exclusive allegiances, like in the civil war between Imperials and Stormcloaks, and in Gothic, we still find valuable loot in abandoned locations, or engage in activities outside of what our profession permits. We are defined by our place in society, but we're still autonomous beings, not slaves to the system. In fact, as you've just seen, Piranha Bytes games even have a bit of fun with the fact that we are beholden to societal expectations. all of a sudden, breaking with those expectations is not a mere footnote in a life of crime, but a thrilling act of defiance that these games routinely encourage.
It's up to the opposing team to sort the fact from the fiction.
Ist mir in der Stadt über den Weg gelaufen.
Okay.
If we must rely on society to grant us the tools we need, it matters a whole lot more which social mask we put on in any given interaction, who we let in on a secret and who we lie to, the people we choose to impress and those we choose to betray. That goes both ways. Sometimes quests must be solved by refusing to follow the instructions, because they turn out to be a ruse to test our loyalty. As much as Elex did not live up to what I'd hoped Piranha Bytes was capable of, it did deliver on these types of quests. It rigidly followed the formula they'd set up more than 2 decades ago. Almost too rigidly, I'd say.
For the claws.
Hi, it's me! I'm back!
But then it was also tied to these shockingly rough and unintuitive controls, some of the most juvenile, tropey, and frankly grammatically incorrect writing I've seen in decades.
Those in need and those willing to help don't normally question my motives.
Are you always so edgy?
And art design so hopelessly uninspired that it almost stuck out again for how remarkably bland it was. But I'm an addict, and I can't get my much-needed shot of this type of experience anywhere else. And I can't put into words just how viscerally upsetting this is. It's the dumbest monopoly imaginable. I know it's crooked, but it's the only game in town. But I'm also like the only customer, and now they're just gone. But I also feel like everyone's been missing out on their lovable piles of jank. Now, far be it for me to tell anyone which games to enjoy. I have terrible taste, and I hope I've made it clear that I personally don't prefer Gothic over Skyrim. But I feel like over the years, the more, for lack of a better term, collectivist side of RPGs has somewhat waned. And now with the death of its major representative in the industry, as inconsequential as it might seem, I fear this genre may sink into oblivion and only re-emerge like a decade later, like immersive sims did around the turn of the millennium. European blockbuster RPGs like Horizon, which I thoroughly enjoyed, have mostly adopted an individualist approach.
It will be your duty to fight for your tribe.
My tribe? You said I wouldn't need them.
But I never said the tribe wouldn't need you. The strength to stand alone, Aloy, is the strength to make a stand.
A quarter of the way through, I literally hit pause on the main quest of Zero Dawn, cleared the map, and returned to questing laughably overleveled and overgeared, because Aloy, being an exile, is at home in the wilderness and doesn't need anyone's approval. And we love her for that.
So I can go anywhere at all. No restrictions.
The closest I've seen anyone come to Piranha Bytes' design philosophy was Czech developer Warhorse Studios' low fantasy RPG Kingdom Come Deliverance, which the developers themselves love to see compared to Gothic. And which I also thoroughly enjoyed for its mechanical representation of social hierarchies and systems, despite all the nonsensical talk of historical authenticity. Whatever that means. I guess it meant portraying blacksmith sons as rebellious Disney protagonists who refuse to be held back by and are willing and able to break with societal expectations, only to discover they were all along. Honestly. You can quite literally brew a potion that lets you see in the dark. It's low fantasy, guys. Come on. And I get it. Without the ahistorical social mobility that this format requires, the game would be shite. I don't want to play as a peasant the whole game. I want to be able to feel my progress as I'm physically allowed into ever higher echelons of power based on my accomplishments, just to eventually stand beside my king with my shining armor and trusty steed. I mean, I say ahistorical. Joan of Arc was a peasant, remember? But can you imagine if they had made Henry into Henrietta? We'd never hear the end of it. Then again, who am I kidding? I just tried to sell you on Gothic. Fest the game. I mean, they had the excuse of a male prisoner colony for Gothic 1, I guess. But then with 2 and 3, they just forgot to come up with a pretext for why there's barely any women around, let alone in positions of power. I'm rambling. just to warn you, Gothic 2, a game made in 2002, I might add, was anything but ahead of its time in terms of gender representation. So don't go in expecting that.
Was machen die Schafe?
Die Schafe fressen und werden immer fetter. Genau wie meine Frau.
In any case, by the metrics I laid out in this video, Kingdom Come shares some, but still barely any similarities with Gothic. I just thought that some people might understandably bring it up in the comments because many gaming outlets like GameStar have repeatedly drawn parallels between the two. But for reasons I find way too nondescript. I don't care if they're both unconventional and punishing and de-emphasize combat. Many RPGs do that. That doesn't immediately make them Gothic-like. There, that's the term I should have used. All this to say, I think there's a gap in the market. Not a huge one, admittedly, but one that truly hurts. And it's been there for a while. Now, I wouldn't call it a golden opportunity, but by Innos, please don't judge the profitability of this format by the fate that befell Piranha Bytes in 2024. These shoes have been empty for almost 2 decades at this point. And I can't wait to see who will eventually fill them.